Hello and welcome to Brian Moore's Full Contact with the Telegraph. Today we bring you a very special episode. Myself and the Telegraph's chief rugby correspondent Gavin Mairs will be speaking at length with the England head coach Eddie Jones to discuss, well, lots of things, but in particular the release of his new book, Leadership. Jones has lifted the lid on England's World Cup final defeat in 2019, and he says he was the one to blame for losing that day, and he's given an insight into his working relationship with the members of his coaching staff, and says he doesn't care if they hate each other. And he explains the thinking behind some of his infamous pre-match speeches, including the one with the samurai sword and kiwi fruit. And if you haven't heard about it, it's worth listening to. We'll also be recapping the recent Autumn Nation series, discussing the emergence of new faces like Marcus Smith, who Jones said he will have to wait years before we see the very best of him. We'll discuss if there's any way back for the likes of Billy Vunipola or George Ford ahead of the World Cup in 2023, and who he sees next as England's main challenges for the Six Nations. Delighted to welcome alongside me the Telegraph's chief rugby correspondent, Gavin Mairs. Hi, Gav. Unsurprisingly, Eddie, as always, as I've found him, he's very upfront in his book and honest. What was your main few takeaways from reading it?
I think, Brian, England supporters will not be disappointed in this book. It's quite a rare thing for a coach who's in position to sort of write a book like this and give quite a lot of details. A lot of it focuses on the 2019 campaign, which has been and gone, and it's fascinating to see with a bit more reflection what he feels went wrong on that day from his own point of view and the players' selections. But as we see, he's also very candid about the current players. We've mentioned Owen Farrell's leadership. He looks at Maro Itoje, the suggestion there that probably he doesn't see him as an England captain in his time anyway. And, you know, Marcus Smith, the poster boy of this new England side, you know, he gives us some insight into what he describes as a blunt conversation, asking Marcus to sort of come up with three ideas with pencil and paper about how he can improve. So I think it's a really fascinating, insight where we've still got players who are playing for him, and it'll be interesting to see, I suppose, how they react to what they read as well. Yeah,
I've introduced a number of new faces in the autumn, and he admits that he's sometimes taking a tougher stance with young players than he might do. What do you make of some of the England's breakthrough players and the autumn campaign that they've had?
I think it's one of the big step forwards, Brian. I think probably all of us have looked at England over the last 2 years since the World Cup and been a bit frustrated. There's been a bit of drift. I think Eddie said himself after the final in 19 that this team was dead, but he spent most of the last 18 months picking the same side. Yeah. We've seen a clear change. We've seen big decisions made about some influential players who he's left out. And I think the most exciting thing from an England point of view is you're seeing Marcus Smith. He's trusting Marcus Smith to come in at the number 10 shirt. I think we've seen Freddie Stewart look like a player to the manner born. And across the pack, where between COVID, injuries, selections, he's had to ask a lot of inexperienced players to come through. Bevan Rudd, Nick Dolly, we've seen these guys come in and do a good job beating South Africa, the standard bearers.
Yeah, and in circumstances actually where, and I put my hand up to this, I was wrong. I didn't think players in the front five positions, no matter how talented they were going to be able to withstand the physical pressure of both South African front fives, the one that they start with and the one they've got to bring on, because they are both. Well, it's arguable which one is the better one, to be honest.
Yeah, it is.
And I just couldn't see that, and yet they hung on in there and they did the job. Now people are saying, well, they were lucky they only had 6 drums. Yeah, they were, but that's what happens in games.
It is, and I think the other really impressive thing is that there were times when that set piece did creak. We have to be honest about that. The lineup was under pressure. The maul was getting a real sort of point of difference, for example. Yes, yeah. But England found a way to win. Yes. England found a way against, I think they conceded 10 penalties in succession. It looked for everyone there thinking, well, this is South Africa going now to grind out a victory as they do so many times. Yeah. And England found a ruthlessness that maybe hasn't always been there in those moments, and came away with victory. And you have to give those guys credit for standing up and I think we touch upon Courtney Lawes as a leader as well. I think a year ago you wouldn't have thought Marcus Smith starting at 10, Courtney Lawes as captain, and a guy who looks genuinely as a serious option to Owen Farrell as a leader, a different leader, but one who's got the players with him and is sort of a totemic figure.
Well, this year's Six Nations, and I'm trying to say this in the right way, barring Italy, because Italy under Crowley will make strides. Unfortunately, everyone else is making them as well, which just always sets them back. So leaving that aside, you've got all the Six Nations are in very interesting positions. I think the Welsh are probably more frustrated than anyone that they haven't been able to get the full squad there, and some of their provincial players are not even in the country, and all things have not been equal for them. But you look at France and where their autumn campaign. The same with Ireland, to a lesser extent Scotland, certainly England, and you're set up for what should be a very interesting Six Nations.
I just can't wait. I just cannot wait. We've both seen many tournaments, and you think back to a period where Northern Hemisphere rugby genuinely appears to be on the rise, and we are so close to the World Cup now, which is in France. Every team will not be challenged by time difference, by humidity, by conditions. And you've got the hosts arguably playing the greatest, most attractive flair rugby
for a long time.
Back to your era, Brian. That they are playing the way French teams. We all love them when they just are playing and they see a play. They want to attack from behind their own goal line. And I think as well, you look Ireland and France both beating the All Blacks. I mean, what a mark of that sends down, a challenge to the Southern Hemisphere. We know New Zealand will come back. They will not brood on this. They will find a way. So I think the Six Nations, England, I mean, when you come out of an autumn like this, you think England have come forward so far, and then you look across at their Six Nations rivals, I think, so's everybody else. And that shows that we go into this tournament thinking, genuinely pick a winner. It's going to be so difficult. And I think what we can all hope for is we're going to see some cracking rugby and compelling rugby. And what a finish with France playing England in Paris.
Delighted to say that we are now able to speak to the England coach, Eddie Jones. Hello, Eddie.
All right, mate.
Before we get stuck into the book, which we will do very shortly, the Autumn Nations series is now done and dusted. How would you rank the achievements of 3 wins?
Look, I'm pleased about the progress of the team. We had the younger guys from the summer, the good ones progressed to the senior squad. We have the guys that came back from a disappointing Lions tour, full of energy, wanting to sort out what happened on the line. So it was a good mix. I enjoyed the rugby we played, and there's a lot of improvement in the team. So promising, mate.
You mentioned certain names during the campaign: Freddie Stewart, Rafi Quirk, Marcus Smith is obviously a name that's on everybody's lips, and you mentioned them in the book. How do you think they progressed, particularly Smith?
Really well, mate. For a young 10 to play with the aplomb that he did against Australia and South Africa is a good achievement. And his big test now is to make sure he keeps working and keeps improving. And he's certainly got the right attitude. There's nothing I've seen that won't distract him from doing that, apart from all the other external forces which can damage a young kid like him.
Because, I mean, got to get us clear on this. When you've pointed out the difficulties that, say, Raducanu had and so on, are you saying that he is falling foul of them, or that he might do?
No, just to put the warning signs out there. I think everyone needs to understand, he's a good talent, but it's not about, once you've got talent, it's about the mentality of applying yourself, about wanting to get better every day, about not getting distracted by potential commercial or marketing activities, and to keep a good balance on your rugby, because at the end of the day, we don't want him not to achieve his full potential, because the number of young 10s that come through at his age with his potential are numerous, and a lot of them don't make it. We want to make sure he makes it. And there's a 50, 100 Test cap player who wins trophies for England.
You mentioned the leadership role, obviously, hugely in your book, and we'll go to talk in detail about that. But Owen Farrell features in this. Indeed, you said he'll be one of the 5 leaders going into the next World Cup cycle. But bearing in mind his absence against South Africa and the leadership role that Courtney Lawes took up, and indeed some of the other parts in the teams, is there any reason any longer to fear an England that doesn't start Owen Farrell?
Oh, look, I think the leadership of the team's evolving, just like the selection is. Owen's a fine player, and we saw that in the Australian game that he's come back after a difficult 12 months with his club being relegated. I don't think we took into consideration how much it affected those Saracens players, not only physically but mentally and even socially. That it had a really difficult. There was a difficult period for them. I was really pleased how Owen came back. So if he comes back from his injury, which I'm sure he will, he'll be a key player in our group going forward.
Yes, just on that leadership, it's fascinating. It's the theme of your book, and obviously, the England leader, the England captain's such a, as you know well, a focal point for the team. Courtney Lawes, we've seen Joe Marler describe him as a sort of people's captain, and what attracted you to him? And I suppose the other fascinating bit is, again, we've all probably in the media talked about Maro Itoje as a future England captain, and it's notable in the book that you sort of question whether that he would be a future captain, and just maybe, I don't know, dealing with Maro going forward when maybe he reads what you've written.
I think in terms of the leadership, I haven't heard that term's people captains for a long time, since 2000, where Joe Roff was the people's captain of the Brumbies. He was a self-acclaimed people's captain of the Brumbies. He used to tell George Gregan that all the time. You might be the captain with a C next to your name, but I'm the real captain of this team. And Courtney's got a bit of that. There's similarities between Joe and Courtney. They're both pretty laid back. They're both really tough competitors, and they both have the respect of their teammates. So Courtney did a really good job, and it was a great reward for the maturation of him as a player. Because I can remember when I first came to England, he wasn't in great physical nick. He was injured a lot. He's worked really hard to get his body right, and it's a great testament to him to captain England in a couple of teams. In terms of Maro, I've never seen a guy mature as much as he has in the last 6 months. So I think it's been a really good period for him. I've got no doubt in the future he will captain. I've got to contradict myself, and contradiction is a big part of life. He will captain England, whether it's in my time or someone else's time, but I think he's really moving in the right direction. And it was really interesting the role that he played for the team during autumn. He took on the role as responsibility for the team communications, which is when the team get together and talk about things they need to talk to. And no one's done a better job than he's done. So I'm really pleased the way he's moving.
And as Brian touched on there, just, with Owen, he's been your totem for so long, but are things up in the air? I mean, I don't know whether when you talk about the new leadership group, could you see, if Courtney comes through the Six Nations, is it possible that he could lead England to the World Cup?
Oh, look, we don't need to speculate on those sort of things now. We saw in the last autumn series, we started off with Luke Cowan-Dickie as a vice captain, Ellis Genja as vice captain, and Owen as a captain, and we lost all those three. So we've got to be adaptable. We need a group of players who can step into the breach, and that was one of the pleasing things of autumn. We want to have a team, and Brian will know this better than anyone, where, certainly a few people have got C or vice C next to their name, but the real leaders is the team itself. And that was a really big movement. I felt we made a small step towards in autumn. We're certainly not there, and we've got to keep working on it.
Just finally on Courtney, Eddie, if you speak to him himself, he probably thought he was an unlikely leader 2 years ago, even a year ago. At what point did you recognise leadership potential in him, and what convinced you that the moment was right to sort of forward that maybe gut instinct?
Yeah, well, it came through late in 2019 where we had, we've spoken about it before, a psychologist come in called Corinne Reid, and she basically tried to detonate the grenades that were still sitting there from the 2015 World Cup. And Courtney was
Eddie, for the people who haven't read this, can you explain what you mean about that by detonating grenades?
Well, the end of the 2015 World Cup, there was certain players that said things in the press about how the team had performed and certain selections, and had basically gone unsaid. And I knew it was sitting there because I'd seen in times during that period where at the end of a defeat there was still this, well, we'll look after ourselves a bit too much. And so we needed to get someone to come in with some specialist skills to bring that all out in the open, and Corinne was able to do that, solve a lot of those wounds. And, the big thing I learned from her and continue to learn, particularly from expert sports psychologists, that every team's full of problems. You've always got problems there, and it's your ability to bring the important problems to the surface and solve them. And, in the old days, Brian, it used to be done over a few beers. People would sit down, they'd talk about, I'm not sure he's right, what are we going to do about it? But that doesn't happen now. So you've got to do it in a much more formal way. And we've got a forensic psychologist working with the team now on certain aspects, as we did Corinne in the 2019 World Cup, to make sure that the problems that are there we're bringing to the surface and solving more quickly.
And what is noticeable is in the book is the changing role and the way that you relate to players and analyse things. You say the things don't work that used to work. What is it about the current crop of players and the current culture that they come through that's led you to believe that you must adapt the way in which you say things, what you say, when you say it?
I think it's, like, firstly, the major piece of evidence is how society is now. Yeah, everyone wants to have a say now. And people expect to have a say. We see that through social media. The old wall in the toilet people used to write their gripes on. Now it's social media, isn't it? And if someone says something and someone likes it, then that becomes truth. And so the team now, people want to have more of a say, but you've got to create the environment for the younger players to say it, because rugby is a hierarchical game. Yeah, you've got caps and they are important because experience wins you test matches. But you need that youth to come in and feel comfortable. So we've had to create, or we're trying to create, a team environment that is much more collaborative, much more opportunity for the players to have their say, to feed back on them when they have their say. It doesn't mean if they have their say that it has to happen, but we've got to listen to them more. And the role of a coaching team is much less of a smiling dictator and more of a smiling guider, a guide them to where they need to go.
And so Dave Brailsford, when I was speaking to him about the Sky cycling team, and indeed British cycling, and it's been one of the biggest success stories of British sport for a long time, he said that when they were having their strategy meetings, not only were riders asked to give their opinion, they were told they had to, because he said, I don't want anyone walking out of this room and saying, I could have told them that wouldn't worked. And once they get involved in the strategising, they feel emotionally invested in it, and they feel more likely to deliver that. Now, I imagine that's something that you probably concur with, but I just wonder, in terms of rugby, which is a much more complicated, has much more moving parts and unit parts, how you can actually do that when there are so many more players than riders.
You can't, mate.
Okay.
Otherwise, you'd never get out of a team room, would you? There's always, like in every team I've coached, there's always one tight head prop that's always got to have the last say. It doesn't matter, you go around the whole room and he'll put up his hand and says, Coach, I've got one more thing to add.
Yeah.
I think we should be doing this. I'm sure you can.
No, it's probing in our day, probing. He said, why are you talking about back moves, Jeffrey? Yeah, sorry. Yeah,
it was always an educated tight head prop in a lot of teams I had. So the process, there's a process that has to be gone through. So we have a group of leaders that I think, we've tried to create a more diverse leadership group, because we were very strongly a Saracens-driven team. And they were the strongest team in Europe. they had the best players, and therefore it morphed into the England side. But with Saracens coming unstuck and the changing of the personnel in the team, the leadership teams had to reflect a more diverse group within the team. So we've tried to do that. So we have that group that we try to encourage the same thing as Dave's saying, and then they've got to take that down to the next level to the players and get that buy-in from the players. And to do that, they generally need the help of a sports psychologist to do that. So we've got Andrea First working with us who performs that role, so that people do have their say, but not on everything, just the important things.
Well, funny you talked about diversity, because I was going to bring that up, and you talked about the role of women. In the book you say 20 years ago coaches would have disagreed. They would say the presence of women would make the environment too soft. Well, we were all wrong. Women bring a depth and a perspective to high-performance sport that's a prerequisite for success, and indeed you've got several women in important positions within your squad. What is it about women? Why do they bring that depth and perspective?
Well, I'm not sure about that, but I know, I've been married for 30 years, and my wife can sometimes look at my coaching staff. She's done it twice, and she said, "You've employed the wrong person." And I don't know why she knows that. And twice she's been 100% right. And that's about the only rugby conversations we've ever had.
Perhaps you should coach, Eddie. You should bring her on.
Probably better than me, mate. But I just think it makes the environment more normal now. We've got a logistic manager, we've got two in the medical staff, we've got a sports psychologist, and it just makes the environment more normal. Mm-hmm. And I think they're just so important for what used to be, an all-male environment.
Well, one of the things that I think they are definitely more adept at, because I've got to, in the alphabet, I've got to about D now, where I was at A, is the emotional intelligence alphabet. And I think women are more naturally like that. They're more empathetic for various reasons. But I also think when you look through the way in which the book's framed, what have you, although you might not use the word emotional intelligence as often as is in there, quite a lot of it does come down to that, and does come down to both yourself, your coaches, and players having that. Would you accept that is right? And if it does have some resonance, how you go about specifically fostering that?
Yeah, well, I think you're right, mate. And I think, one of the big things you need to have now is particularly empathy. Mm-hmm. Be able to put yourself in other people's shoes and understand what they're going through. How do you foster that? I think, again, you have to have an awareness of it. I know our coaching staff, we're being educated in that. We have classes on how to have better conversations with the players. And the structure of those conversations from the coach to the players, and then being good role models for the players, and to have those conversations themselves is just so important. And that's an area that we've invested more in than probably any other area of our game over the last period of time.
Eddie, on that point, and one of the things that fascinated me in the book was your approach to Marcus Smith, where you talk about feeling almost sort of a need for an intervention, a blunt conversation, I think you called it, to say, are you going to make the most of yourself? But at the same time, you're also handing him the device to self-improve. And it's a fascinating mixture of maybe in the olden days, it might have been a bit more top-down, where you'd tell him what he has to do, but you were telling him he had to change, but then you asked him to identify what he felt he had to change. And they're just interested in the kernel of that approach to leadership.
Yeah, well, I think it's much more about now the player owning the problem rather than you solving the problem for the player. The traditional model was that the coach solved the problem for the player, and I think we're almost. It's funny, and Brian will probably understand this a lot. It's almost gone back to where we were in rugby, as a rugby team when Brian and I played, the players solved most of the problems. The coaches didn't solve the problems. And then we went through this professional era where the coach became so important. and players just listen to the coach. And I think we're going back now to where the players, because it's a players' game, rugby. Coaches can't play the game for players, and it's getting much back to where the players own the game much more, and the coaches are there to facilitate the process rather than being the football manager, so to speak.
And at the end of the 3 matches, Eddie, in terms of England's progress, I think you asked Marcus 3 questions that he had to, bring to you answers. I don't know how you feel he has progressed in answering those questions as we sort of now look towards the Six Nations.
Yeah, really good, and I enjoyed the way he played yesterday. Like, he had to tough it out, mate. It was a difficult game for him. The Quins weren't on the front foot much. He had to play off scraps. They like most little blokes, they targeted him, they ran at him hard, and he had to hang in there. And I thought he fought really hard, and you could see he went in the game with a really good attitude, and that's what I'm talking about, that mentality of wanting to keep improving. So, I think all the signs are there that he's going to keep growing.
And as things stand today, Eddie, all being well, is he your starting 10? He hasn't. There's no reason for him not to keep going.
You're not bad, Gavo. Hey, you want me to name the sides 8 weeks before the first game?
Just one.
He's definitely in the mix, mate.
Oh, look, I can't fault the preparation of the players. They've worked hard the entire World Cup, and I think they've played with a lot of pride and passion. We just weren't good enough today, and congratulations to South Africa on an outstanding performance.
In relation to the World Cup just last gone, against New Zealand, we got almost a perfect performance, and I do agree with that. But you also said that you've used some startling imagery for people who don't know of buying a samurai sword to slice up a kiwi in front of the players. What sort of... Why was that done?
It's just a bit of theatre, mate. It's just a bit of theatre, a bit of fun. I always wanted to buy a samurai sword. I always thought of myself as samurai. So this is an opportunity to buy one. So we found this... my interpreter found this tiny little shop in Miyazaki. So Miyazaki's little coastal town. And it was like this... There was only one person could fit in the shop. And it was this person who collected samurai swords. So it was an original samurai sword. So I don't know how many people are killed because, samurais, only one person lived. So I had this antique samurai sword. It's beautiful. It's somewhere in Japan now because I can't bring it back because I'll get arrested. So it's sitting there somewhere in Japan. I thought, we'll have a bit of fun here. And the night before I got kiwi threw out to my room and I was practicing chopping it up. And then I thought, we'll give it a go at the team meeting, just to have a bit of fun. And then we'll have to play around with the samurai sword in the meeting.
I mean, you say in the book that it was your coaching mistakes that cost England the World Cup and so on with South Africa. Now, I've got my own views on this and I'm not sure I agree with you. But and I also wonder whether this is part of you trying to deflect away from the team responsibility before it. I mean, what coaching mistakes do you think you made that cost England? Because I'm not entirely sure about this.
Yeah, look, I think, at the end of the day, when you don't win, it's always the coach's job is to get the team in the best position to win. And I don't think we played to our potential in the final, and I put that down to my fault. I made the mistake of going with the team that we had in the semi-final, and during that tournament, every game I changed the team a little bit, and I think we could have made a couple of changes that might have made a difference, might have made a marginal difference. The second thing is I don't think we were explicit enough in our language saying that we had to start again. We spoke about it all the time, but sometimes, your message isn't quite right, and you'll know, as a player again, that if the coach's message really right, the players will follow it. And I don't think we got ourselves to where we had to really start again and go again after that New Zealand semi-final. We probably just rolled on a little bit from it, and that was the mistakes I made, mate.
And Eddie, just on that, how would you, if you had that time again, in terms of getting that message across, would that have been, I don't know, a brutal training session on the Monday, or it was a difficult time to sort of cope with the ongoing momentum of the tournament? You've just beaten the All Blacks in such a momentous fashion. Just looking back, and you've obviously considered it through the book about what you could have done that week that would have maybe got that message through.
Yeah, probably just would have brought things to a stop more and said, right, and even it might have been something theatrical about drawing a line in the sand, just saying, right, we've got to leave all that behind, and this is what we've got to do now, and maybe change the training week. We trained similarly how we trained. We took a bit out of the week, which, half the staff think we took too much out, and half the staff think we didn't train hard enough. So there's this sweet spot you got to get the team in a final. And I've been in enough finals and got beaten in finals to know that it's just the tiny little 1 degree or 2 degree things you say or you do at training that can get you right for the game. I always remember, Brian, you'll remember that 91 World Cup. I'm sure you still got a scar at the back of your head, mate. Yeah. And I'm sure you can recall everything during that week that you felt was right and wasn't right. Yeah. And I've had that experience twice. And I'm still beating myself up about it. And I'm sure you're still beating yourself up about the 91 World Cup. Yeah. Players do it, coaches do it. There's so small margins we're talking about here.
You talk about the psychology of certainty, and you're talking about not allowing your staff and team to be too comfortable. But how do you instill the uncomfortable edge, and meaning that you rarely drop the intensity, but you enable people to still live with that? Because some people have burnout points at other points. How do you go about that?
Yeah, look, I think with players, there's a more of a natural cycle to see where they're at and getting feedback from the players. I think the one area I certainly haven't been good at, maybe up until the last period of time, has been with staff. I wanted staff to have the same intensity and the same work ethic I've had, and a lot of them don't have that. And I probably have burnt out staff previously, but I think I've been a lot better the last 5 or 6 years. Mm-hmm. Maybe age has helped with that, mate.
Well, you say you've become an immeasurable. You think you're a much better coach than you were in 2019. Where's that improvement come from?
Well, I think reflecting on the mistakes I've made, searching for new areas of where we can improve team performance. I'm absolutely loving the way the game's going at the moment. I think it's this nice mix of, and we saw it even on the weekend, of this fight in the set piece, fight over the ball. But then if you're able to break that, you can move the ball into space quickly. And if you're good enough with your catch and pass skills and your running lines, you can play some really good rugby. And if the game keeps evolving like that, we keep evolving the way we train, we get selection right, we're going to put ourselves in a good position to win the World Cup.
You talk about the difference in emotions of people, darker motives, lighter motives, fear of failure, the approach to success. What sort of testing do you do with players to find out which they are and how you do that?
Through conversation, through training. One of the things we introduced for the last campaign was this idea. I brought it back from Japan. We did it in Japan. In Japan, we took them up 3,000 metres and they had to sit under a waterfall for a couple of minutes, freezing water. And it's this Shinto cleansing where you got to find a bit in yourself, a bit more in yourself. You got to fight all the things you're thinking about, fight the hardship. And we did that with paddle boats out of Jersey to see which blokes could stick in. And it was amazing, mate. After 30 minutes, because they're out like 2 kilometres and the wind's blowing and it's pretty hairy out there. And our strength and conditioning coach went out because we said after 30 minutes, some blokes are going to get hypothermia, so we don't want to kill anyone. We're pretty clear. We're pretty clear about that. So after 30 minutes, the S&C coach goes out there, John Clark, and says, "Boys, you can come in now, no problems." And they all say, "No, we'll finish this." And some of the groups were out there for an hour, and it's just putting those little tests in place that are testing their desire to fight that want to give up, because, if you give up once, you give up twice.
Mm. You talked about the science of learning on borrowing ideas from someone who's smarter and being an ideas thief. But how do you know who to steal from and what to steal?
Well, success leaves clues, mate. Find the most successful people. We've recently got one of the most successful teachers in America. He teaches inner city schools, for disadvantaged kids. So he's created this whole 600 schools where kids are doing immeasurably better than the average for them. And we got him in the lecture to the coaches about teaching better. As I said, we've got a forensic psychologist to come in who used to have to sit down with psychopaths and work out, whether they're safe enough to be in a normal jail, to improve our communication skills. We're looking to find the best people to bring in to educate us to be better coaches and to pass on to the players.
You talked a lot about your gut feel and now trusting that. My view has always been, actually, that virtually every decision a person makes is gut feel, and they justify it afterwards and if they're clever, they can do it much more easily. Because it comes from me, I don't know if you've read The Chimp Paradox, Steve Peters. About the chimp being 6 times more powerful. With your gut feel, why do you think what's led you to trust that more?
Well, again, one of the things I've learned over the last period of time, that gut feeling's actually accumulated data. Mm-hmm. That over experience, you've picked up enough information. Like there's that great story of the fire brigade in New York. They go in and the bloke's standing there and he's there 10 seconds and he says, "No, we've got to get out of here." And they get out because the fire wasn't on this level. The fire was underneath, and within 12 seconds the whole thing blows up. But he picked that up because the top of his ears was Siri. And so you pick up that information, that data you pick up about where players are at, what you need to do at training, and you still make mistakes. If I got $1 for every mistake I made as a coach, Brian, I wouldn't be sitting here, mate. I'd be retired in Barbados. But we're trying to learn all the time.
Looking ahead to the Six Nations, and the great thing now, we've got the backdrop of the World Cup as well. I think you probably thought 4 years ago in your head was, beating New Zealand was going to be the key to winning a World Cup. I don't know if that overall, that thought has changed. Is it South Africa? I mean, I had to write a piece recently, is South Africa the standard bearers now of world rugby? We've seen France come through majestically in the last 12 months. When you're sort of looking for runners and riders and maybe just seeing who's progressing in what ways and maybe what ways you might have to evolve to beat them, is it more complex than it was sort of 4 years ago?
Yeah, well, first of all, if we just start with the Six Nations, mate, how's that changed over the time I've been here? I remember when I first came here and they talked about it being the greatest tournament. Well, I probably had a few reservations, but now I don't think you can debate that at all. If you look at the quality of the teams in the Six Nations, Scotland's improved out of sight, Ireland's regenerated, Wales are tough, and France is a completely different team. What was it, 4 years ago we beat them by 60 points. If they probably didn't come out for the first 15 minutes, we might be a chance to beat them by 60 points down. They're a serious team. So you just look at the way the Six Nations has evolved, and Italy with Kieran Crowley, who did a great job with Canada. He did a fantastic job with Canada. So he's had that sort of experience of bringing a Tier 2 side up. So he'll improve Italy. And then you look at the rest of the world. You've got New Zealand, who are always going to be strong because they've got that centralised system of producing players. South Africa have won the World Cup. They've beaten the Lions. Any team that can do that in the space of 2 years is a serious winning team. But having said that, if you look at their age profile, they are getting older, and whether those players can sustain it for another 2 years to the World Cup is is a question. You know, you got Vermeulen, who's 35 now. You know, he'll be 37 going in the World Cup. There's a few others in their 30s. So, yeah, but they've got a lot of good players coming through. And then you've got Australia who's resurrected themselves under Dave Rennie. So I reckon this World Cup coming up, you know, the big thing is you just, like in every tournament, you got to take every game as it comes. You know, every game as it comes. And you can't get too far ahead of yourself saying you got to beat so-and-so in the semi-final. And France is what a great place to have a World Cup.
Yeah.
You know, rugby there at the moment. Like I was there last weekend. They show every top 14 game live. They show every Pro to every one of those games live. You know, rugby's going through the roof there, absolutely going through the roof.
And Eddie, what was the key things you learned from that sort of fact-finding mission in terms of prep?
That the whole France nation is getting behind France for that World Cup. You know, they've got 40 professional clubs. They have 42 players in camp. They can keep 28 players until the Wednesday. You know, everything's being geared towards that team doing well at the World Cup. And for us to compete against them, we're going to have to get everything aligned here. We just had a great meeting with the RFU on Friday about really finding a way to get everyone behind the team for the next World Cup. And so, yeah, it's absolutely exciting, mate.
And can you share any details of that, or what's the sort of thinking?
Not at the moment, mate. Still in the very infant plans, but we've got 2 years to get there, mate, so we'll get there.
And just in terms of, I suppose, the logistics, do you have any changes in terms of where you want, do you want England to be in one place and travel up to matches, or have you sort of adapted your thoughts on that?
Well, we don't get a choice, mate. We're England, remember? We're up the north of France somewhere, mate.
Some of the players who weren't in the Autumn Nations squad who've been mainstays, the likes of Brendan Fowler, George Ford, and so on. Do you have any contact with them? Do you need to reassure them that they can still fight the way in, or is that implicit?
I'll speak to them before around selection time. Like I'll speak to any players that are in the mix. But all of those guys, I'm pleased the way they're going at their club, and they've just got to keep going. No doors closed. It's all open, and the more competition we have, the better it is. Like you look at loose head prop now. We've got Mako, we've got Marlow, we've got Genge, and now we've got Bev Rod come through.
Yeah.
A young guy that's played his second test against South Africa. What experience he's had. We've got hookers, Brian. If you were available now, you'd be in the team, mate. We've got Jamie Blamire playing 10 minutes off the bench for Newcastle. Dolly who's, straight out of the Castle Hill RSL. And the great thing, we've got Luke and Jamie coming back. So, we've built some good depth in those areas.
This is it's completely non sequitur, but I want to ask you this question. Neil Craig, high performance leader, why is this so important to you in the squad?
Because he's a truth teller, mate. Like, he's got no reason not to tell me the truth all the time. Mm-hmm. And it's so important. The longer you've been in a job, it's by nature the more power you accumulate, and so you need to have someone there that can look at what you're doing to the team, what the environment's like, what it needs, without fear or fear of losing his job or fear of being castigated. And he's like that, and he's got such a wealth of experience. Like he's the brightest guy that I've been associated with in sport. He's a guy who was started off as a sports scientist with Charlie Walsh when Australia cycling was a joke team, took him to number one in the world. Coached AFL for 7 years, coached racehorses. His first horse the first horse he trained won the race. It ran over 2,400 metres, and he got called into the steward's shop afterwards and had to explain how his horse first up could win over 24,000 metres. He said, well, I've trained it for it. But hole and below, further down the track, he didn't have too much success. But he's a really bright, clever, tough guy.
And Eddie, just on the coaching side of things, it was interesting to read in the book about, just your thoughts on Sean Edwards, a guy you clearly admire, and you use a sort of suggestion that you'd love to work with him. I don't know whether Has that boat sailed in terms of England with you, or do you think you could see him at Twickenham someday?
No, well, he made a decision to go and coach France, which is his choice, mate. We had a discussion that probably wasn't right at that particular time. But I think he's doing a wonderful job, and I'm sure at some stage in his career he'll coach England.
And overall, you feel the coaching setup is quite settled now? Is that the sort of, or?
No, we want to improve it all the time, mate.
Yeah.
But
does that mean more people or the way you do it?
The way we do it, mate. And really pleased the way Martin Gleeson and Seabold and Cockrell have come in and added to it. They've been good. You know, Cockrell's a tough, hard, got that real bulldog spirit. Gleeson's got an eye for detail and attack. And that first phase try we scored against South Africa, that's his coaching, mate. That's his coaching. And Seabold's, been an experienced head coach at NRL, and he's going to really add to our defence going forward. So really pleased the way it is, but we want to keep getting better.
You talked about being a player's game. Well, not necessarily if Rassie Erasmus had his way. I'm sure he'd like to be on the field directing all sorts of traffic and what have you. Because you were saying you nearly had a meltdown after the Wales game and nearly did something similar. What dissuaded you from doing that, and what do you think of what Rassie did?
Yeah, well, I think, Brian, the game's a difficult game, and I think the referees are being put in a poor position by World Rugby, and I think we've overstated how important technology is, because technology isn't solving decision-making. It's making it worse. Like, I saw a situation on the weekend when there was a forward pass and they go to the video. Well, the video can't tell you whether it's forward or not unless you've got a camera right in line. Yeah. And so we've got to, I think that whole process has got to be refined, and we've got to make sure we're respectful of the referees. There's at times we'd like to say things about the referee, but if we allow that to break, then the game will really degenerate.
What would you like to do in terms of a practical situation? Because I would like to go out foul play anytime, but that is clear and obvious foul play. Not do you want to have a look at this and see if this pushing and shoving is, but also I'd go back to the act of scoring as well. And I'd forget all these, 2-3 phases beforehand.
Well, I think you're right, mate. I think it should be scoring, and I think on foul play, they should say, I think I've got a potential red card, we need to stop the game, look at this, or we've got foul play, let's put the player on report, and then they can do the process afterwards.
Fair enough.
Like if it's a clear red card, then stop the game, watch it, get the right decision, but if it's not, then put that player on report, and then it can be looked at in detail afterwards.
Yeah.
And if he needs to be suspended afterwards, suspend it. Because, the game against South Africa, we had 30 minutes ball in play and 70 minutes ball out of play.
Yeah.
Like, if you're a spectator, you've got plenty of time. I suppose it's good for the RFU, isn't it? Because you can go and get plenty of pints. Like, you've got 70 minutes to go and get plenty of pints. Yeah. But I wouldn't enjoy it as a spectator, and I think we've got to get the ball in play is hard to get more of.
Yeah.
But what we can do is reduce the ball out of play, and I think that's just so important.
Having listened to Eddie, what people might be surprised about, I think, is his candidness in saying, making admissions like, he has burnt people out. He hasn't done this right, he hasn't done that right, but he's prepared to admit that. Quite against a lot of the stereotypes, certainly that the Celts have of him.
Yeah, and I think probably with Eddie, he's learning, he's changed himself, and he'll admit that. And I think you probably look, even within his time with England, it's 6 years now, we've probably seen an evolution there with himself.
Yeah.
And I think we've got the position 2 years out. He probably feels that he knows his time's coming to an end, and he thinks, well, look, I've got a good crop of young England players here, and I'm going to empower them. He talked about that 4 years ago, but really, I think, I'm not sure how genuine that empowerment was, whereas I think you see him asking Marcus Smith, tell me how you can get better. He's not demanding improvements from Smith, but there's that little edge there to say, I think you need to improve, but I want you to tell me how to do it.
Yeah.
And I think that's a fascinating change in his management style of, it's no longer top down, but he's encouraging a new diverse leadership group at the heart of this side.
Well, the thing is, coming from the same era as me, exactly contemporaries, it is true, the comments he makes about the changing nature of society and the way you deal with players, because he said in the book, I used to be able to, get angry, it was fine. I used to be able to be very blunt with people. I now no longer do that. Not because everyone's gone soft, but it just doesn't work. And then he goes on to explain why. And that to me was a hugely, it was a huge demarcation in terms of where we've got to in rugby and indeed, in wider culture, I think.
Brian, it's full circle. I think he said full circle. We're back to when you were playing and you had, people with jobs, leaders outside of rugby coming together and problem solvers. And then we had a period of professionalism.
Well, Gavin, simple as when you only had, like we had, a manager and a coach/forwards coach, they couldn't possibly know everything. Yeah. And now you've got S&C, you've got all these people who have the area's expertise. And I've always thought one of the difficulties is getting rid of the clutter, because every person, to justify their job, wants to have their moment with the team, the squad, during a day. And I've been told by several directors of rugby that one of the most difficult things is to get them to say, we don't need your bit today. Yeah. Because they think, oh God, am I going to be sacked? They don't rate me, they don't need my message, and so it's finding ways to make that work with the overall goal of and I've always said this, you can do as much as you like as a coach. The players, in the end, have to solve it on the field.
They do. And that's, I suppose, the biggest trust a coach has to give is allowing his players to find those solutions in real time and not feeling that he has to tamper. And I think we're seeing that with this England team, that we've seen glimpses of that this autumn, that they're finding a way to win, as they did do against South Africa, against the odds. And
I just say this in front. People, and I know Jones divides opinion, and people are, even a lot of England fans are now quite likely to give him short shrift quite quickly. They've got to understand that if you do this, players will make mistakes. And if you step in as a coach and go against what you've said, to I know the answer to this, rather than then work things through on the field as well, then you are defeating the purpose. So people will have to put up, with another even coming. It might be that the Six Nations doesn't go well, but do you want Jones to stick to his guns with this and empower players and do it like this, or don't you? Well, that's all we have time for this week on a special edition of Brian Moore's Full Contact. Thank you very much for my co-host Gavin Mairs. Huge thank you to the England coach Eddie Jones for joining me and being so frankly, disarmingly honest. You can purchase Jones' leadership book now from all good bookstores, and you can read excerpts from it in the Telegraph or online. If you've enjoyed this episode, you can check out all our previous episodes by subscribing or registering to the full podcast channel. It's free after all. And you will find there all our Autumn Nation series episodes, along with others. I'll be back next week alongside Rob Vickerman as we look at the first round of European fixtures and a lot more. But until then, it's goodbye.